Good morning. Welcome to the Friday morning special session. I'm sure the room will continue filling up, so I'm here to just warm you up with a little introduction and get us thinking about exercising your voice. So we're going to spend half the day today talking about exercising the voice from various perspectives. As people have become more aware of the role of fitness in their personal health and wellness goals, it occurred to me that the old stereotypes of singers, in particular opera singers, has changed dramatically. Similarly, the science of sports and exercise has matured substantially over the past few decades. But what do we know about the effects of exercise for vocal performers? So let's take a few minutes and consider exercise and voice within a historical context. Imagine, if you will, the stereotype of a female lead in an opera, with the obvious caveat that you can't tell a person's fitness levels by simply looking at them, but humor me for a moment. Who or what comes to mind? Brunhilde, of course, the comically exaggerated Viking Norse warrior woman. And of course, who doesn't know the line by the sports commentator Ralph Carpenter that opera ain't over until the fat lady sings? The reference is to Brunhilde's 20-minute aria at the end of the 4-hour opera, Rotterdam, which is only a quarter of the 17-hour Der Ring des Nibelungen. Forgive my German. So clearly the stereotype of the outrageously fat opera singer has changed, and aesthetic preferences have evolved. Singers have long been under the impression that it's advantageous to be large in order to have a powerful voice and large lung capacity. The resistance to changing body size may have been a consequence of the unfortunate vocal decline of Maria Callas, and that many critics believe was related to her large, rapid weight loss in 1953. Callas reportedly lost weight because she wanted a more svelte body type and a slimmer face to play certain roles. But during a 1968 interview, she admitted, "I was getting so heavy that even my vocalizing was getting heavy. I was tiring myself. I was perspiring too much. And I was really working too hard. And I wasn't really well as an adult. I couldn't move freely." Critics wrote that she lost her rich, heavy voice. So what advice have vocal pedagogues and mentors been giving over the years? Well, mostly none at all. But the few instructions about fitness that I found with the help of Claudia Friedlander, thank you Claudia, have been mixed. Mario Maraviotti, Enrico Caruso's laryngologist, wrote in 1922 that while it is urgent for a boxer or a fencer to keep his muscles in continual training, it is hardly necessary for a thinker, a writer, or anybody who is devoted to a purely intellectual form of activity to overtax his physical strength. As singing belongs to this latter class of activities, all books and methods advocating physical training for singers seem to consider singing more as a muscular action than as an intellectual achievement. We would suggest that singers take care of their health just by following the normal rules, the normal rules of, I have to look up here, because it ran off the screen, sorry. The normal rules of intelligent people without exerting themselves in any form of physical training. We see the advice from vocal pedagogues evolving, as in this quote from Richard Miller's 1996 book, The Structure of Singing. Miller claims that the singer can participate in athletic activities that ensure excellent general physical condition, and if they're not strenuously carried out past the age when physical exercise should be cut back. But he also notes that even in the prime years, it is questionable that muscular development, including those muscles directly related to singing, need attain special dimensions for singing. The notion that singers do not need to be fit may also be related to the idea that it's simply not necessary. In a recent public interest blog that I found, the author wrote, "Howsoever absurd this reason sounds, it is actually quite logical. Other performers, like actors and dancers, need to have a fit physique, as it directly impacts their ability to perform. Opera singers, on the other hand, don't necessarily have to watch their weight in order to sing. Then again, if you want to sing while dancing and running all over the stage, you may be wise to heed the advice of Beyoncé's personal trainer, Mark Jenkins, and apparently also her father, who was her original trainer. According to an article in The Insider, Jenkins had Beyoncé sing her entire album while running on a treadmill, and it had to sound good. This intense aerobic exercise conditioned her to be able to sing and dance without getting winded. So this morning's session is devoted to topics surrounding exercise and the voice. I hope this brief introduction provided you with some stimulating ideas and context for the information you're about to hear. And please jot down your questions so that we can have a lively panel discussion during the last hour of this morning's session. So we're going to hear from 4 speakers who are experts and cover a wide range of topics. The first 2 speakers will set the stage from the perspective of sports science with Mary Sandage and neurophysiology of the laryngeal muscles with Aaron Johnson. Then we're going to have a 30-minute coffee break, and I encourage you to visit our exhibitors and enjoy a snack, but please do return by 10 minutes before 10 o'clock, so 9:50, so that you're on time to hear Claudia Friedlander talk about vocalists as vocal athletes. The formal presentations will wrap up with Mark Moliterno's presentation on body awareness through yoga. And after that, all the presenters will engage in a 50-minute panel discussion with each other and with you. So again, jot down your questions. We'll have plenty of time to discuss your thoughts. So, without further ado, then, I am going to introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker today is Mary Sandage, Associate Professor in the Department of Communication Disorders at Auburn University. She has a bachelor's degree in English from Iowa State University, a master's degree in speech-language pathology at University of Iowa, and a PhD in exercise science at Auburn University School of Kinesiology. Dr. Sandage is internationally recognized for her clinical expertise in the areas of occupational voice and upper airway disorders. Her research interests include skeletal muscle bioenergetics, upper airway thermoregulation, and standardizing objective measures of voice function. She is a member of NATS, a former coordinator for the ASHA Special Interest Group of 3 voice and voice disorders, and has been editor for The Voice, which is the newsletter of the Voice Foundation. So Dr. Sandage will be talking to us this morning about sports science and its implications for the vocalist. Mary.
I want to thank Nancy for asking me to do this. I mean, selfishly, I think we should all be thinking about how exercise science might influence voice training. I was telling Bob yesterday that I was a little nervous, and he said, "No worries, you're among friends," and I know that I am. So I'm a little hoarse this morning, and I feel that way. I've been extensively lecturing in some intensive courses, so if I have to stop and do lip trills, we'll just all do them together, okay? Great. So for those of you who don't know me, I have been a clinician for over 25 years. I'm also a singing teacher. So one of my specialties is rehabbing injured singers. And then in 2012, I earned a PhD in exercise science. I chose exercise science because I didn't think that we knew enough about what we know about training other muscles in the body affect voice function. And I have to say, throughout my program, half of the time I was thinking, wow, I really wish I would have learned this a long time ago. And the other part of my training, I was thinking, wow, that kind of explains why this works when I'm doing voice care. So what I want to do today is just establish a foundation of information about what exercise science is and what areas we study in exercise science. And then I want to turn the lens more toward voice care and some things that I'm thinking about. So this is a bit more foundational and theoretical, but it will focus it on voice by the end of the talk. So in exercise science, there are a lot of subspecialties. Some of them are more basic research where someone might do animal research. I am an applied physiologist, so my interest is in taking the basic research that's done by folks like Aaron Johnson, and he'll talk about some of that after I'm done with my talk. Also some basic laryngeal epithelial work that's done by Beth Lewandowski, who studied with Preeti Shivashankar. And I'm interested in applying that along with my knowledge of muscle training into occupational voice use. So some of these sub-areas that exercise scientists study are muscle fiber types. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but knowledge of the kind of muscle fiber types we have should help us understand what aptitude a muscle might have for training to do specific activities. Bioenergetics is the study of how the body produces muscle fuel. The primary muscle fuel is adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, and there are definitely training influences for how efficiently we're able to produce ATP. And then folks in exercise science are also interested in understanding aging changes. Aging is becoming a very popular topic, and we know even for conditions outside of muscle fitness, for dementia and Alzheimer's, for example, there's some evidence that exercise might help improve cognition and brain function. So the benefits of exercise go beyond the muscle cell level itself. And all of those three areas really funnel into how exercise scientists think about training adaptations, how to plan for training, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well. So if we think about muscle fiber types, a lot of the way that we think about voice is drawn from our understanding of limb skeletal muscle. The intrinsic laryngeal muscles are skeletal muscles, and actually some of them are allotypically from the way we develop from an embryo. They are actually maybe the same allotype as limb skeletal muscles. I'm still working that out myself. But I think that's important when we think about how those muscles might have aptitude to train. I think we have to be careful about translating limb muscle science to larynx, because if you think about it, the number one job of the larynx, and we focus on voice function, is really to buffer the external environment so that it warms and cools the air so that our core can maintain an optimal temperature of 37 degrees C. It is highly adaptable, so it's got this primary function of airway protection and environmental modulation. And so there's probably some big differences in the way these tissues function. Across all individuals, most people have about a 50% ratio of fast twitch to slow twitch fibers. Fast twitch fibers are those fibers, they're called type 2 fibers, that we use for fast, powerful activities. So if you are very good at jumping, I am not. I really was terrible at basketball, even though I'm 6 feet tall. One might think that I would be great at it. I wasn't. I can't jump. I'm great at long distance things though, so I probably have more type 1 endurance fibers. So most people are at 50-50, but there are outliers, and those outliers are our elite Olympic athletes. So the folks that are elite sprinters probably phenotypically have a higher percentage of fast twitch fibers. Those folks that are elite endurance athletes phenotypically have a higher percentage of type 1 fibers. It's interesting for me to think if some singers fall into those categories. Maybe a certain kind of soprano who can rapidly change notes natively has more type 2 fibers, so they're able to make those faster acceleration differences than maybe a heavier, more dramatic soprano that can do the endurance pieces, like the one Nancy described in the introduction. So we don't know much about intrinsic laryngeal skeletal muscles and their fiber types. The image that I have here, this is a collapse of fiber typing done in 3 cadavers that was published by Rosenfeld in 1982. Most of the papers that are published on intrinsic laryngeal skeletal muscle are either cadaver studies, and they're mostly older individuals. We don't know a lot about how they use their voice in their life. Or they are like the healthy vocal fold if someone has to have a total laryngectomy. So we don't really know a lot about it. But in this study, what I think is interesting is so we have 3 individuals, and then we've got the thyroidnoid here, lateral cricoarytenoid here, cricothyroid, and the PCA. What I think is really interesting is the PCA has a higher percent of type 1 fibers, as are shown in the dark blue bar. The PCA would need to be more of a type 1 or endurance fiber because its job is to keep the airway open for the vast majority of our day, right? So that makes sense. But we do see some variability between individuals with the TA muscle. One of the individuals studied had less than 50% endurance fibers and a predominance of type 2 or fast twitch fibers. That's good. We need a fast larynx to cough and clear and protect our airway. But then this third individual had 60% type 1 fibers, which is probably a little unusual. So be careful when you're reading the literature because you don't want to imagine that everybody's exactly the same. We are all highly variable. So this is one area that we need to know more about. Of course, it's incredibly hard to study. In limb skeletal muscle science, you'll take a muscle biopsy, which is a piece of muscle about the size of a piece of rice, probably like out of your quadricep muscle or another larger muscle in your body. If we took that out of the larynx, that would be very damaging because the volume of the TA muscle is very small, of course. I'll get to that in a second. On this slide. So bioenergetics, again, is the study of how our body makes fuel for cellular muscle functions. If anybody remembers back to their study of the mitochondria, which is called, does anybody remember? The powerhouse of the cell, thank you. I don't want to cause any traumatic memories from the medical scene here, but if you remember that you had to remember the citric acid cycle, oxidative phosphorylation, glycolysis, and oxidative phosphorylation. Those are the mechanisms by which we produce ATP. The way our body uses those mechanisms, though, is largely based on the muscle fiber type and also how long we're engaging in activity. So if you look at the graph here, what this is showing you, the light blue is the immediate energy system. That is, ATP is produced with phosphocreatine or creatine phosphate. Weightlifters creatine load for a reason. They will recover faster from a maximal weightlifting effort if they've got more creatine on board because then they will recover their immediate energy system better. Anybody know how long the average football play is? I'm in the SEC. We think a lot about football in the SEC. Anybody know how long it is? 4 seconds is how the average, American football, not football, soccer. Thank you, Maya. That's great. Oh, sorry. Right, so if you are a football fan and you watch football, you'll notice after a running back runs the ball down the field, they're usually pulled off the field so they can recover their immediate energy system. That takes about 30 seconds to a minute before they're put back on the field for another play. There's 30 seconds between plays. That's for a reason. Because for many years in sport endeavors, people have been applying all of this physiologic knowledge to optimal performance. We don't really do that in voice yet, to the degree that we probably could. And so I just want to give you some things to think about today. But the thing about the immune energy system is depleted within the first probably 20 or 30 seconds of activity. The body then shifts to reliance on glycolysis, or circulating glucose in the blood or stored glycogen in the liver. That energy system is depleted at about 2 minutes, and after about 2 to 3 minutes of continuous activity, the body then transitions to a primary reliance on oxidative phosphorylation, which uses oxygen as a substrate to produce ATP. All 3 energy systems are turned on at the same time, but it takes 2 or 3 minutes for oxidative phosphorylation to ramp up. So what I think is really fascinating, as we can learn from some of the literature published by Ingo Tietze and also a paper that one of my master's students published, Audrey Smith, our voice on time is really primarily less than 3 seconds. It's actually less than probably 2 seconds at any given time. Because in connected speech, right, unless you're singing, right, but in connected speech, our voice is on and off all the time with voice and voiceless consonants. With singing, we may hold out a note a little longer, but even in a recital performance, we can only hold it out as long as our breath can sustain it, right? We can't do circular breathing like an instrument, like a high-pressure instrument player. So we're not really ever turning our voice on for longer than maybe 20, 30 seconds, right? So we may be more reliant on the immediate energy system and glycolysis than oxidative phosphorylation. Now, I'm not a basic researcher, but there are those folks probably here that are looking at these basic mechanisms and anxious to learn what they find out. The other aspect of bioenergetics is this work-rest ratio. And in sports science, folks have figured out that the optimal work in light blue to rest in dark blue ratio for football is about for every 1 second of work, they want another 6 seconds of rest, or 1 minute of work, 6 minutes of rest. We don't really understand what that is for voice, right? I mean, we don't, and we should try to figure these things out so that we understand who's got optimal recovery if they're an extensive voice user. Other things we need to keep in mind are age and sex considerations. There are distinct differences between natal male and female muscle fiber development. Men or natal male, if they've got typical testosterone on board, they typically rely on hypertrophy to grow muscle strength. Whereas women tend to rely on neuromuscular programming. So for women, if you go to the gym, right, you want to build your muscle, you're going to, if you lift weights, right, a lot of us don't see a lot of progress visually for the first 8 weeks because we are gaining strength, as because we're increasing our weight, but we don't look like it because we're really using all these neuromuscular mechanisms. Now, there are outliers. Some women do get a lot more muscle definition than others, but younger men rely primarily on hypertrophy or getting larger muscle fibers for strength gains. Men, this does change for you in about age 40. You start to have a shift to a greater reliance on neuromuscular mechanisms and less reliance on hypertrophy. And again, there are outliers. This doesn't apply to everybody, but in general, older men have more changes probably with how they gain strength than women. We don't really know if the TA muscle can hypertrophy with exercise. We're interested to know that. Wouldn't that be a nice resolution for vocal fold bowing? And I do believe there's a couple papers that have addressed it, but I don't know that we can expect that muscle to hypertrophy in general. The other way to think about training adaptations is like lots of systems in the body, skeletal muscle is in a constant state of repair and breakdown. And so one of the benefits of training is that you upregulate a lot of muscle systems to make muscles more efficient. And if you stop exercising to the degree that you're used to, right, it's easier to stay in shape than to get in shape, right? We've all had that experience. That's because if you stop challenging the muscles in a typical way, then the body decides, well, we need to be more efficient. Why are we maintaining this muscle tissue? Let's downregulate a lot of these mechanisms. The muscles might get smaller, right? Because we're not storing as many locally available fuels in there to make muscles efficient. So the body's in a constant state of breakdown and repair. And the degree to which it's breaking it down depends on how much demand you're putting on the body. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I mapped all of this into this theoretical framework. And we'll visit this again applied to voice. But when it comes to training the body for sport and athletics, a strength and conditioning coach or trainer in general is thinking about the goal, the end goal. So maybe it's training up to be able to play soccer, or it's training up to be able to do swim racing or what have you. So they're looking at what the end goal requires physiologically, and then they're mapping the target intensity, so how hard is your body working, and the duration, how long is your body working, into a training program to help you adapt your body, right? It might be your heart and your lungs, your cardiorespiratory fitness, but it's also your muscle effort, right? Your motor learning, adapting all of those things so that your outcome then is hopefully skillful activity that is fatigue resistant. And excellent skill in what you do along with trained fatigue resistance is important for injury prevention. Because, I mean, we see this with, like, if you're ever watching an Ironman, those folks get tired, right? And then their skill starts to flag, right? Their running gait looks like they're tired. It's not efficient anymore. Think about if you're lecturing extensively, I may be maintaining resonant voice, but I'm starting to feel like I'm starting to engage in more extraneous muscles to just try to keep my voice going, right? So we compensate when we're tired. And I think that compensation that comes in with fatigue is where we have a tipping point, maybe to voice disorder. But if we plan for fatigue resistance, then we won't be as likely to slip into that compensation. And all of these are planned over a period of time. And this is a model that we've applied parts of this, I think, to voice training, but we haven't really thought about planning for fatigue and fatigue resistance and more rapid recovery in a lot of voice models. To map this in slightly a different way, I just wanted to show in this slide that Fatigue management and planning for rapid recovery starts at the very beginning of training in sports science with strength and conditioning. So a lot of athletes do a period of strength and conditioning right before their actual training season starts. So, and it generally runs concurrent with skill acquisition, motor learning to learn how to do the sprint efficiently, right? So they're going to do strength and conditioning with the strength and conditioning coach. With the track coach, they're going to learn how to come off the blocks efficiently for the sprint. So they're going to acquire those motor learning patterns and specific skills to be able to do that activity very well. And then once they're trained up and they're in season, right? So think about training up to open a show, Broadway show, right? You should be conditioning for it, and then when you're open, right, you're in your performance season, then the idea is that once you're in shape, you only need to do 70% of your maximum to stay in shape, right? So there's a maintenance dose that's involved in this. One of the things that I think about a lot is what do classroom teachers who are using their voice extensively for 9 months out of the year do during the summer, and then when they go back in September, it's like they have to hit the ground running after this 3-month period of detraining, which probably is not optimal for a lot of teachers. And we don't really have good constructs for strength and conditioning for voice or for maintenance programs in voice, and I think a lot of that's because we don't really understand how to operationally define load. And we don't really understand what intensity levels are. I mean, we have sound level measures, but that's just how we perceive loudness. It doesn't really speak to the other aspects of sport exercise. In sports science, there are very well-established, validated performance assessments that you can do to assess someone's fitness level and also someone's training level if they've been engaging in a training program. Whole body assessments, like in the top picture, which is a VO2 max test. This is a test where the person's breathing in room air, but all of the exhaled air is going out of this tube and into a metabolic cart, and it's calculating what fraction of oxygen they're using in their working muscles. It's a measure of efficiency, right? If you are trained up, you will more efficiently use a larger fraction of oxygen to deliver and produce ATP for muscles. This is a great test to do for endurance exercise. It doesn't have to be on a treadmill. If you're a cyclist, you could do it on a stationary bike. They do have a way to even do it in the swimming pool for swimmers, but the sport needs to be as specific as possible to what you do. There are also tests for your ability to produce power. 3 of the most popular ones are listed here. The 1-minute step test. This is a picture of the Wingate cyclergometer test. This is a 30-second all-out power test where you're cycling against resistance. It's very hard to do, but the amount of power measured in watts that you're able to produce says something about how many type 2 fibers you have on board and how much power you can produce. And then the Margarine test is about a 4 or 5 second run up the stairs test where you calculate power. When I was doing my comprehensive exam defense for my dissertation, one of my faculty members asked if there was anything like a vocal wind gate. Could I imagine having a vocal wind gate test? I've been thinking about that for 8 years, right? I think that would be great if we could come up with a vocal wind gate test. So stay tuned. I'm slowly working toward that sort of a thing. We also have a way to quantify percent of activity based on heart rate. I mean, a lot of you probably do this, right? 220 minus your age plus or minus 10 is your maximum heart rate. And then if you want to do 50% of your total ability, you do 50% of that number as your target. Or see how this works? We don't really have a way to quantify level of intensity of workout for the voice, and that would be great if we could do that. So for many years in voice care, and again, I'm a speech pathologist and a singing teacher, I merge all that into kind of one job, right? If we aren't thinking about applying principles of exercise, then we're probably treating our clients in a similar way. And I have been treating my clients in a similar way for a lot of my career, right? We're not always, making more boutique approaches toward the individual needs of the client, right? Everybody gets the same amount of home practice. They're sent home without, I pay more attention to this than I'm probably admitting, but we're just not paying attention to the very specific needs of their vocal dose in particular. And then we've been very, very fond of prescribing extensive voice rest, which probably isn't the wisest thing to do if we want to avoid these detraining effects that a highly skilled voice user has carefully trained, right? And detraining is not just intrinsic laryngeal muscles, it's probably also respiratory muscles as well that can get out of shape And if we look at the tissue mobilization science, you know, I'm in my early 50s. When I was in high school, if somebody broke their leg, they were on crutches, and they were not weight-bearing on that leg, right? Now, everybody's in a boot, and they're walking around, because we know that using that limb signals the bone to heal better, faster, stronger than being non-weight-bearing. There's some emerging evidence in the voice literature that mobilizing the tissue actually causes less inflammation than total voice rest at, 3 days post-surgery. So I think voice rest is absolutely warranted in some situations, but I think we have to be prudent about how much we're recommending, and maybe having folks do, you know, alternative things that are kinder, less therapeutic vocal folds to mobilize the tissue. And again, this idea that there's detraining effects maybe force a performer that goes on hiatus, and do you blame them? They're killing themselves on stage, they need a break, but if they take an extensive break, they can't expect to just walk back out on stage and do it necessarily without being fatigued and potentially engaging in some compensations that aren't optimal. So I think we've already started to add principles of exercise science in what we do, and I've listed several of them here. I do think we could probably spend some more time over on this side, though. I'm sorry. Thinking about these ideas of unloading, detraining, reversibility of all of the things we've trained up, how planning for fatigue management, right? Planning the exercise up to the point where the person can recover faster because all of these mechanisms are more fatigue resistant. And then thinking about how our body uses fuels to produce energy. So training the voice requires a lot, right? And we're paying attention to a lot of the components in this slide. A lot of us are paying attention to the environment and how the environment might influence voice, and there's been some great research done by Preeti Shivshankar's lab. I've done some of it myself, and other folks are looking at that. We are doing a pretty decent job of paying attention to health implications of medications effect and other diseases on voice function. We've given some thought to age. I know aging voice is a very popular topic in a lot of meetings now. We know more about the genetic influences on voice function. But one of the things I think we could be better at is thinking about the overall time requirements, the work-rest ratio that someone has in their job or in their performance, and what's the average sound level they need to produce. Are they locked in speaking voice all day long, or do they require a very extensive dynamic and frequency range as a performer? And so I think that there's a lot more nuance that we can pay attention to when it comes to training voices. So why do we need to know all of these things about skill acquisition and load and fatigue management? Because I think we need to really understand how we habilitate a voice or build it up to do what it needs to do. And that would help inform how to rehabilitate the voice as well, if we're thinking about both sides of it. We need to figure out what does this person require for their job or for their performance, and then plan accordingly. And then that can help us offset phonotraumatic behavior by making sure that they do have some fatigue resistance. They're not starting to engage in compensatory behavior because of fatigue. And I also think that another aspect of this would be to help us develop work hardening and work conditioning programs. In occupational medicine, they have very well-developed programs for work hardening to get people back to work so they don't re-injure themselves when they go to work. We haven't really described a work hardening program for voice, but wouldn't that be great if we had a stepwise way to get someone back up to being able to do what they need to do on stage? Then we feel more confident about sending them back to work and not worry about them coming back 2 days later because we made a bad judgment, or maybe just a not well-thought-out, decision about sending them back into performance. So one of the things that I've been doing in my lab is thinking a lot about vocal dose and how that applies to bioenergetics. And so just merging a lot of different evidence together. This slide was put together by, it was initiated by my student Audrey Smith, and then I've added to it as well. So here we've got a collapse of data from a paper by Cantarella on call center operators and their vocal dose. Music and classroom teachers from the data from Sharon Morrow and Nadine Connor that was published. And then this is recital data. This is from Matt Hoke. A lot of you know Matt Hoke. He's a colleague of mine. He had a Schubert suite, 20 pieces, no intermission, no break, 73 minutes of singing with a little break between each piece, of course. That was his dose. And then this is a cycling fitness instructor, an undergraduate student of mine who's interested in studying what the voice load is for cycling fitness instructors in a boutique club-like atmosphere where the ambient dB is 95 to 105. It's just incredibly challenging. Yeah, so what we have here in this slide is on the y-axis here, we've got dose in kilometers. So these numbers are kilometers. The music teacher's voices on average in this paper were about 7 kilometers during an 8-hour day. Right? That's quite a lot. Yeah, we agree. Classroom teachers are about 3.5 kilometers. Matt Hope was a little over 3 kilometers in 73 minutes. The cycling fitness instructor, 2.5 kilometers in 45 minutes. Now, this line here is the proposed safety limit that Ingo proposed. And this safety limit is based on tissue vibration requirements set by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration for jackhammer operators. So OSHA has, to the best of my knowledge, and I have not read it in the last few months, so the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, for those of you that aren't from the U.S., is the federal standards for workplace protection for workers, right? There's nothing in there for workplace protection for voice. Nothing for voice. However, if you're a jackhammer operator, they don't want you operating it more than 4 or 5 hours a day because they do not want the excursion of your arm to exceed 500 meters. These occupational voice users are blowing way past this. Now, in this paper, Dr. Tietze was generous and said maybe double that would be okay for voice because we have voiceless periods and connected speech, right? But that's not a practical paradigm for the requirements that these folks have to do every day. So in this slide, I took the same data, but I'm showing it in a different way. So here we have, in exercise science, you'll do you'll manipulate the numbers so you can compare men and women better because men have more lean body mass than women do anyway. So there's ways that you can kind of equalize the data so you have a more fair comparison between individuals. So what I did was I took the data and I figured a relative distance dose. So over here we have the number of meters per minute that each of these individuals used over the course of their day. Here's their total dose in meters over the course of the whole time the data was collected. Here's the number of minutes that the data was collected. So 420 would be an 8-hour day, right? The average amplitude, so how loud their voice was on average during the data collection time. So it could have been higher or lower. So we can see the cycling fitness instructor has the highest target decibel level. This is quite stunning. And actually, the students developed vocal pathology. She didn't have one before she started teaching because she volunteered for a study. I have high-speed imaging on her. She had a pristine larynx. But after several weeks of teaching at that level in that environment, it's been quite traumatic on her larynx. Recital singing, we've got here. Here's what I think is interesting. Here's one teacher over the course of an 8-hour day. Not a huge vocal load. Here's another teacher. Almost 19 kilometers of vocal vibration over the course of an 8-hour day. And here's a single music teacher on one day and then on a different day. One day, these are all, this is Matt, so this is a male, all the other folks here are women. This teacher, so this is an elementary school music teacher. One day, 8.5 kilometers worth of dose. This was a long day though, they must have had some after school activities going on, right? But here's a regular old 8-hour day, 18 kilometers of voice at an average dB of 87. This is quite a load. And if we look at the relative distance dose, the distance dose for this person is about equal to Dr. Hope's in 73 minutes, but over an 8-hour day. And so if we think about it in this way, we need to be treating these people for what is their work requirement, right? Not treating everybody like they're the same. And not all teachers are the same, not every day is the same for them. And so we need to meet people where they're at, for sure, if we can manage to operationalize some of these things. This is just another way to look at it, but I think it's interesting. This is comparing Matt Hope's recital to the average classroom teacher in the Morrow and Connor study. So here we have relative distance dose. So Dr. Hope's distance per minute was, over close to 90% of what the classroom teachers was. but very little time spent voicing versus the classroom teacher, yet their vocal distances were close to equivalent, but very different people, right? So if we think about this, Dr. Hope's effort was probably more of a power effort, and the classroom teacher's more of an endurance effort, right? So if we come back to this theoretical framework, but we put voice into this, can we, I think with the equipment, the ambulatory dosimetry equipment that's available now, and it's getting cheaper and I think more portable and easier to use, we can get a pretty good idea of what the intensity and duration requirements are. Wouldn't it be great to know what the average lead roles are for musicals and other performances and operas? And, it would be nice to know what's the target load, what's the target frequency range, what's the intensity output, right? And then we can plan training, right, so that all of the adaptations occur that need to occur so that the person can both acquire the appropriate skill but also develop fatigue resistance, so they're less likely to be injured on the job. We can also use this framework to plan for work hardening or work conditioning programs so that we can get people ready to be able to do the work that they need to do without re-injuring themselves if they have to take a break from the show and then return. And all of this is done over a period of time, right? So we need to plan the time for people to train up to be ready for the voice work. One thing that troubles me is most school teachers have no voice training as undergraduate education majors, and so they're sitting all day long in classrooms listening quietly to their professors. Maybe they're doing small group activities, and then all of a sudden they're in the classroom and they're expected to project their voice. Well, they're not taught anything about projection, right? And there's a share of folks that probably leave the profession because of voice. And teachers want to be there, right? We spend as many healthcare dollars on teacher voice disorders as we spend on pediatric ear infections, over $2 billion every year. It's really necessary that we figure out a lot of these constructs so that we can help everybody, right? So if we think about exercise science applied to how we train up the voice, and we're all in the business of habilitating the voice, right? Or rehabilitating the voice, using an exercise science perspective helps us understand that we need to think about the length of voicing that the person's required to do, the dynamic range that they are required to do, keeping in mind, what is this a percent of their max? Is it moderate voice work or extensive voice work? Do they have an opportunity to rest and recover throughout the day? Some of our job may be helping them and advocating for them at work to help build in more breaks throughout the day, right? So they have some opportunities to recover. Have they learned the appropriate technique, right, so that they can be as effective as possible with the least amount of phonotraumatic behavior? But even the best technique, if the person's asked to do it for a long period of time loudly, the person's going to tire, right? Because they're going to run out of their bioenergetic substrates to produce ATP for months. So even the best, most highly skilled person, when put in an extensive situation, is probably going to get tired, and that's reasonable, right? We should expect to get tired. And then we also need to think about genetic factors that may drive the aptitude. I had an undergrad student a few years ago we were talking about optimal vocal folds, right? We can spend all day talking about optimal layer structure and extracellular matrix. And she raised her hand and she said, does anybody know if there's an optimal vocal tract shape? I was like, what a great question, right? There's clearly some people, especially if we think about classroom teachers, they can go in the classroom, they can speak long and loudly, and they don't ever report a voice problem. They probably have a really great resonator, right? And they know how to use it. Other people need a lot of training to maximize what they have. Some people may have a greater percent of type 1 fibers and they're better able to do endurance activities, whereas other people may not, right? So I think if we think about it that way, maybe we can figure out who probably needs assistance and who doesn't. All right, and there's my references. Thank you so much.
We're so fortunate to have a kinesiology expert of voice, a voice science expert who also knows voice so well. That was amazing. Thank you so much. without education about sports science and bringing it right back to where we all are. Our next speaker is also in that similar category. It's Dr. Aaron Johnson. Dr. Johnson began his career in voice as a professional singer and a teacher of singing in the Chicago area for over a decade. He then shifted his focus to the health and science of the voice and got a master's degree in speech-language pathology from Rush University, a certificate in vocology from the National Center for Voice and Speech, and a PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in voice and speech science. After 4 years on the faculty at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, he joined the New York University Voice Center in 2016 as an assistant professor of otolaryngology in the NYU School of Music. So at NYU, he works clinically and evaluates and treats voice disorders in performers. He's currently directing an NIH-funded research laboratory investigating neuromuscular mechanisms underlying vocal exercise and aging. So please welcome Dr. Johnson.
Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you to the Voice Foundation for hosting this session. Thank you, Nancy, for your invitation to join you. I am in the School of Medicine. I may have written music on my, I don't know if that was your slip or mine. I write music. It's like confused. Where am I? I've done so many different things related to voice, because voice is my passion. It has been my whole career, as you've heard, in a variety of different ways. And today I'll be talking about what I've been up to the past 10 years or so, getting into the underlying kind of basic science aspects of the neuromuscular aspects of the voice, an area that I never expected to be doing when I was performing as a singer. And I'll just start by letting you know I don't have any relevant financial or non-financial disclosures. I am in the market for anything, however, so if you would like to compensate for my talk today, I'm happy to speak during the coffee break. So whether it's voice therapy, singing training, acting voice training, we all use vocal exercises in some way to change the sound of the voice or improve vocal function. And hopefully, the exercises that we're using have a clear functional goal, such as increasing vocal range, improving vocal agility, etc. And as Mary pointed out in her framework, the outcome of vocal training and vocal exercise is skill acquisition and fatigue resistance. Now, also, we hopefully have a solid hypothesis, at least, for the physiological rationale for the vocal exercises we're using. We have some sense of the underlying physiology of voice production, and the exercises are making a change at that level. But we really don't fully understand the physiological or the neuromuscular changes that underlie vocal training or vocal exercise. Based on modeling studies, theoretical constructs, and some in vivo measurements, such as vocal fold and vocal tract imaging, as I said, we do kind of understand how the larynx is changing, how the voice is changing, but we don't really know how, or even if, our vocal training and vocal exercise affect the actual muscles of voice production. There's much more knowledge about how training and exercise affect skeletal muscles, as we've heard a lot about already this morning, in other parts of the body, such as the arms and legs. And part of the limitation in our knowledge of the voice is that it's difficult to access the muscles of the voice, in particular the laryngeal muscles. And we can't directly measure the strength of the laryngeal muscles. We have to use proxies such as maximum vocal tasks related to pitch and loudness. But are these maximum vocal tasks really maximum muscle tasks? The question is, are vocal exercises really exercising the voice? Can we build strength or develop endurance in the vocal muscles? And conversely, we'd like to know what happens with detraining or disuse, such as vocal rest. Is vocal training simply skill training? Is it all about motor learning and skill acquisition, or are there actually neuromuscular adaptations in response to increasing or decreasing vocal use? Well, the short answer is I don't know. However, I do believe the pathway to answering this is to apply the concepts and knowledge and constructs of exercise physiology to the voice, as Mary has so beautifully provided this framework for our discussion. And I'm going to focus my talk today on the variables of intensity and duration, and some of the adaptations, the specifically neuromuscular adaptations, to vocal exercise. So we're going to cover three main topics in the next 30 minutes together. We'll start by discussing neuromuscular adaptations that we know about in response to exercise in the muscles. We'll then look at some possible examples of exercise training in the voice. And then finally, we'll discuss some animal models of vocal exercise as a way to help us overcome some of the limitations of accessibility and control when it comes to trying to study the vocal muscles in humans. So let's start by taking a look at what we know about neuromuscular adaptations to exercise in the limb muscles. In the limb exercise literature, exercise has classically been categorized as either strength training, such as lifting weights, or endurance training, such as long-distance running and cycling. Strength training engages the anaerobic, immediate, and glycolytic bioenergetic pathways, as we've seen, whereas endurance training relies more on the aerobic oxidative pathways. And in truth, there's really more of a continuum between the two, and many exercise programs, including, I believe, vocal exercise programs, are really a combination of both. Neuromuscular adaptations in response to exercise are specific to the load placed on the muscle, and this is called, as you've heard, the SAID principle, or specific adaptations to impose demand. So to increase functional ability of muscles, muscles must be taxed above and beyond their typical capacity. We can use our two training variables of intensity and duration from the theoretical framework to define the different types of exercise. I'm also adding another variable here, recovery time, which we've heard a little bit about, to this table. So if we look at high load, short duration activities with the opportunity to recover, for example, the running back who sprints full out and then is pulled off the field to recover, the type of adaptations we would expect there would be an increase in strength. If we have moderate loads with a relatively high duration or volume, with a moderate period to recover, then we might see increases in the size of the muscles. And then finally, at the other end of the spectrum, with a very low load and a high duration or volume, with very little time to recover, we start to get into endurance adaptations. And so think about how different vocal demands may fall into this table, and how different ways we use our voice may sometimes be more of a high load with increases or necessary increases in strength, whereas endurance, like perhaps the teacher who speaks 8 hours throughout the day with a very high dose, may be more of an endurance task. So the adaptations to these different types of trainings, and again, it's a spectrum, but if we classify the two, the first thing I want to point out in this table is that neither strength nor endurance training increases how many muscle fibers we actually have. So we don't expect that we will grow new muscles or increase the amount of muscle fibers we have in response to either training. Instead, it's the size of the individual muscle fibers that increases with strength training, and that increase then also results in increases in speed and strength and the anaerobic capacity. On the other side, with endurance training, we expect the aerobic capacity to increase with endurance types of training, and that is largely due to increase in capillary density and also an increase in the size and number of the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. Now, the previous slide said neuromuscular adaptations, but it kind of looked like all of the parameters were muscular adaptations. While the initial functional gains from resistance exercises, when we're increasing strength and speed, are actually due to increased neural activation with training, thereby increasing muscle fiber recruitment. This graph shows a classic experiment which demonstrated that initial gains in strength after 2 weeks of strength training were mostly due to these neural adaptations. As time went on, with further training, adaptations were seen within the muscle itself, such as muscle hypertrophy. Another point on this graph is that it takes progressive and sustained training to cause adaptations in the muscle itself. Conversely, ceasing training and exercise results in a loss of the gains made during training. And this shouldn't come as a surprise to any of us, but it's something to consider when we're thinking about vocal training, recommendations for voice rest, as we talked about the ebb and flow of vocal demands. As I mentioned before, specificity is critical for neuromuscular adaptations. So even though you might be a very good cycler, and running is also an endurance activity, you will not necessarily be a good runner because you're a good cyclist. So the specific muscle or groups of muscles need to be engaged in the specific activity to receive benefit. And obviously voice is a completely different muscular activity than cycling and running, but even within the voice world, if you're up in New York City anytime, I recommend seeing the revival of Carousel. There's some really amazing vocalism going on, and these are two of the performers in that production I'm probably familiar with. And very different sounds that are coming out of these two performers in the very same production. And I'm guessing that they are using their muscles in a different way to produce these different sounds. And then we go down the street and we're getting much different sounds out of this performer. So the particular type of activity, not just cycling versus running, but really the type of vocalism that we are training for matters. So let's now turn our attention back to the question, can we actually exercise the muscles of the voice? We'll take some looks at an example from each of the three major subsystems, the respiratory, respiratory, and laryngeal systems. So the first example I'd like to look at is respiratory strength training. Now, this isn't vocal training per se, but I think it's an interesting example of a program that's intended to build strength of the respiratory muscles, which consequently may improve voice production for individuals with respiratory muscle weakness. The basic concept is to strengthen respiratory muscles by breathing either in or out against resistance provided by a valved device seen here in the figure from the paper below. Increased engagement of the respiratory muscles during these maneuvers has been shown using EMG, and the strength outcome measures have been increases in respiratory parameters such as peak expiratory flow rate and maximum expiratory pressure. Again, not directly measuring the strength of respiratory muscles, but using a proxy. So, should we as vocalists engage in respiratory muscle strength training? Well, if a patient, singer, client has inadequate muscle strength for voicing, then perhaps, such in the case of injury or neurological disease, it might be helpful. But in most circumstances, people have more than adequate respiratory strength for vocalizing and really be better served by developing respiratory coordination and developing the skill with voicing. Again, thinking about the specificity principle, just blowing against a device is different than training the breath for vocalizing. Increasing strength in muscles of the vocal tract and the resonance system is generally not required, but just to kind of throw it out here for food for thought. It is possible to strengthen muscles in and around the vocal tract, including the tongue. Here's a picture of the IOB device, the Iowa Oral Performance Instrument. And this is a device that was developed to assist with oral strengthening exercises, including the tongue and the lips. As a side note, I'm not endorsing the IOB at all. These exercises, such as the one you see on the right, are typically part of oral dysphagia rehabilitation, not in voice therapy. But I did, again, want to include this as we're thinking about exercising the voice and how the voice is more than the larynx. I often say we're very laryngocentric in the voice world, and we do love the larynx, so let's turn our attention to our favorite organ now. That's my favorite. One of the reasons I'm so interested in researching vocal exercise is the possibility that we can use vocal exercise to prevent and treat age-related voice disorders that are thought to be partially caused by laryngeal muscle atrophy. And the evidence for behavioral interventions to treat presbyophonia, age-related voice problems, is scant but emerging. As Dr. Jen Yost stated in a review article from a couple years ago, the evidence is promising. She concluded that three approaches that yield most promising results were the vocal function exercises, the phonation resistance training exercise, and the Lee Silverman voice treatment. What's interesting to me from an exercise physiology standpoint is that all three of these interventions that have shown promise use some sort of maximum vocal function task, either maximum phonation time, maximum frequency, or maximum intensity. This would be consistent with a strength training approach that has been shown to be successful with treating age-related muscle atrophy in the limb muscles. Of course, we can't directly measure laryngeal neuromuscular response in humans, or can we? This is an interesting paper that has not been cited. I haven't seen any continued work, but it's an interesting in vivo study, and looking at the use of spectroscopy, visible light spectroscopy, to measure oxygen and relative total hemoglobin levels by measuring the reflected visible light. And this study looked at 6 subjects using a non-contact probe and also laryngeal EMG to confirm muscle activity as related to changes observed with the probe. And they concluded that this technique could be used to look at changes in relative total hemoglobin and tissue oxygen pre and post-exercise. Now, the exercise that they used in this study was 60 seconds of sustained phonation, taking a quick breath when needed. I don't think anybody could do the 60 seconds in a row. So this was an acute use of the voice, and it was looking at the tissue as a whole, not directly at the muscle. But I think it's an interesting approach, and I'm hoping that as technology continues to miniaturize wearable devices, that approaches like these may be used in humans. But in the meantime, how do we investigate neuromuscular adaptations underlying vocal exercise? Well, let's take a look at animal models. Using basic science methods allows us to get at the mechanisms underlying vocal exercise and vocal training. Specifically, animal models allow us to overcome the limitations of looking at humans by providing direct access to laryngeal muscles. And much of what we know about voice physiology, biology, and biomechanics comes from established animal models. Larynges from other mammals such as dogs, cats, pigs, sheep, cows, and rodents have all been used to study the voice. Each species has particular strengths and weaknesses as models for the voice, and probably one of the greatest challenges of using animal models is getting them to vocalize. One way around this is to use electrical stimulation to simulate vocal exercises. Muscles contract when they receive a signal from the nervous system, and this signal is essentially a small jolt of electricity. Therefore, by applying electrical stimulation either directly to the muscle on the surface, as you see here in this little video, or by stimulating the nerve directly that supplies the muscle, you can stimulate muscle activity and simulate exercise. This is a technique that has long been used in muscle physiology research and in rehabilitation. And many of you are likely familiar with the often controversial use of electrical stimulation to treat swallowing disorders. And that's a can of worms that I will not open right now. There are 2 different animal models that have been used to look at electrical stimulation in the intrinsic laryngeal muscles, a rat model and a sheep model. The work from Kentucky by McMullen et al. On the left here used adult animals, and they did supramaximal stimulation for 2 hours a day for either 1 or 2 weeks. And what they observed was that the muscles did not hypertrophy, but that there were changes in the neuromuscular junction and mitochondria that they described as consistent with endurance training. Now, it shouldn't be so surprising to us that there was no hypertrophy. Recall what we were talking about earlier, that the initial adaptations to strength training are neural. So we would expect there to be changes in peripheral innervation and muscle recruitment, but not necessarily any muscle hypertrophy. In contrast, the study on the right did demonstrate laryngeal muscle hypertrophy using 2 minutes a day to fatigue the muscle over 29 days. So a very different stimulation protocol. And using electrical stimulation gives you a lot of control over the parameters of the muscle activity. It makes sense that they found hypertrophy based on the intensity, the maximal contraction leading to fatigue, as well as the duration, 29 days of stimulation. I'd like to spend a little more time now explaining the behavioral animal model that I've been using in my research to investigate neuromuscular adaptations to vocal exercise. I first developed this model while working on my dissertation at the University of Wisconsin with Dr. Nadine Connor and with significant contributions from Dr. Michelle Schucci. Over the past few years, as I've been developing my independent research agenda, first at the University of Illinois, now continuing at New York University, I've continued to develop this model, and I have discussed this model before at the Symposium, but usually to about 10 people in a small room. So because I think most of you haven't heard me talk about this, for those handful of you that have, I apologize for the repetition. But I'd like to take the opportunity to share with you some of the work that has been done, that's been done since the last time I had the opportunity to speak here, which has been a couple of years, and also share with you some future directions. So first of all, I'd like to convince you that training ultrasonic vocalizations, or USVs, is a good model to study laryngeal neuromuscular mechanisms, and there's several reasons for this. First of all, the overall morphology, the cartilaginous and muscular structure of the rat larynx is very similar to that of other mammals, including humans. Both central and peripheral laryngeal innervation is also similar between humans and rats. And interestingly, modulation of these ultrasonic vocalizations, frequency modulation that is accomplished using the same musculature. Some very exquisite work by Dr. Tobias Reed using laryngeal EMG in awake vocalizing rats showed that both the thyroidnoid and the cricothyroid muscles are active during USV pitch modulation. So this shows that similar to human vocalizations, fine motor control of the laryngeal muscles is necessary during USV production. What you just heard there were 3 different types of ultrasonic vocalizations. You say, how did I hear ultrasonic vocalizations? Well, you slow them down, and slowing them down then decreases the pitch into the audible range. But those vocalizations all centered around 50 kilohertz. So the vocalizations are really quite a bit higher than our range of hearing. Now, there is a very important and interesting difference in the rat larynx from the human larynx that I'd like to explain. The image you see here is from a recent dissection that we did as part of our ongoing work. And you can see this is from behind the larynx, or in the rat it would be above the larynx. And the cricoid has been split down the middle. So we have, looking from behind, here's the left arytenoid, the right arytenoid, here's the left vocal fold and the right vocal fold. You can see the epiglottis that I've skewered with a pin here to keep it in place. And then what I want to point out is this little horseshoe type cartilage here. That's called the alar cartilage, a cartilage we don't have in our human larynx. And it turns out that that's a pretty important feature in rat ultrasonic vocalizations. You can see just below the alar cartilage is a little pouch. And that ventral pouch has recently been described, again, by Dr. Reed, and described as an integral part of USV production. What he puts forth in this paper from late last year is that USVs appear to be produced via an edge tone whistle mechanism and not vocal fold vibration. Now, we've known for many years, or excuse me, Christiane, we've not known, but we have hypothesized for many years that USVs, ultrasonic vocalizations, are a whistle mechanism and not caused by tissue vibration. I think that this recent work really is excellent work, and it really tells us that, it shows us that there's an air jet that's created by glottal adduction, so glottal adduction still is required for USV production. That air jet then strikes the alar edge of the ventral pouch. So here we see a cutaway in an MRI. So the airstream would be coming up here, it would strike, be constricted here through the vocal folds, and then hit the alar edge of this ventral pouch, and then the pouch acts as a resonator, and the frequency of the whistle then is determined by the size and shape of that ventral pouch. Again, I found this to be quite a convincing paper, and highly recommend it if you're really into the mechanism of these ultrasonic vocalizations. Now, the implication of this is that this model is good for looking at laryngeal muscles because glottal adduction and TA-CT contraction regulates fundamental frequency. But this model wouldn't be good for looking at changes in the vibrating cover. And this really, I think, is an advantage, as Dr. Adrian Schembel recently pointed out to me, who joined our lab as a postdoctoral fellow. in saying that we can then look at neuromuscular activation without concerns about the effect of vocal load on the vibrating cover, which is something that as we think about vocal load in the human voice, what are we talking about? Vibrational load, vibrational dose. What are the muscle dose when we talk about fatigue? Is it muscular fatigue? Is it biomechanical fatigue? Right? It's more complicated in the human voice when we have to deal with these multiple layers. One more feature of USVs before I get to the neuromuscular aspects here is that we can train rats to increase their vocalization production. So we see here a graph on the left with a training paradigm over 6 weeks where the control group did not vocalize even though we were interacting with them. And our trained group slowly increased up to 250 vocalizations in a single training session, which lasts anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. And their rate as well, the frequency, often they vocalize per minute, also increased over those 6 weeks. Here is just a brief example of one of our trained rats. So you will see in the background here, we do this in red light because they're nocturnal animals. And so on the video monitor, which you won't be able to see precisely, but this is a spectrograph that's running in real time. We have an ultrasonic vocalization microphone up here above the cage, and we'll be listening or watching for the vocalizations. And you'll hear in real time the vocalization downsample to a little chirp. So we'll hear a little chirp when the rat vocalizes, and then you'll see my hand enter the field of view with a little fruit loop to reward the animal for their vocalization. I spent a good deal of my dissertation work cutting the fruit loops in the dark. Another story. Vocalization, the reward, and after we finish this, we'll hear another chirp. And he's looking for that reward. So they're pretty smart, they're very trainable. And if you want to know more about the training paradigm, I'm not going to spend any more on it today, but we do have an interesting video protocol in the Journal of Visualized Experiments, jove.com. And if you search by my name or search for ultrasonic vocalizations, you'll find this particular protocol that uses mating as a way to elicit vocalizations, and then either a food or water reward. And we'll have a chance at the break, I can tell you more about that. So, hopefully by now you're convinced that this is a good model, and we found a few things using this model. We've shown, first of all, as I mentioned, I'm interested in aging voice, and we've shown that training old rats to increase how much they're vocalizing does affect their vocal function, as measured by changes in the vocalization acoustics, and that vocal training causes peripheral neuromuscular adaptations. And I like looking not only at the larynx, but in terms of neuromuscular aspects, but also measuring the acoustics of the ultrasonic vocalizations to see if our vocal training has a functional impact. So in terms of the acoustics, what we found in this first study that older rats on average have a lower amplitude, average amplitude of vocalizations than young rats, and that with training, the old rats increased their average amplitude of their vocalizations, so that it was not different from the vocalization amplitude of young, and it was significantly different from the control group. On the neuromuscular side of things, we looked at the neuromuscular junction, the NMJ, and the reason that we looked at the NMJ is that, as I mentioned before, these peripheral neural adaptations are seen before their adaptations in the muscle itself. So I figured if we're going to find anything, we would first find it in the peripheral nervous system. So we looked at the morphology of the neuromuscular junctions. We see here two NMJs, or the motor end plates, which is on the postsynaptic side, on the muscle side of the junction. And on the left, we see a normal end plate, which consists of these tightly packed clusters of acetylcholine receptors. While on the right-hand side, we see a dispersed motor end plate that's sort of breaking apart. And this is one feature of aging muscles. And actually, these samples both came from older animals, but the one on the left was from a vocally trained animal after the 8 weeks, where the one on the right came from a control animal that was not trained. And this is the first evidence using this model that shows that vocal exercise or vocal training can actually change the peripheral muscle. In a follow-up study, we changed two important variables from the initial study. First of all, we individualized the training goals, In the first study, I wanted to standardize the vocal dose, so all of the rats vocalized the same amount to the same target. But in this one, instead, we individualized those targets, and older rats tend to vocalize less than younger rats. So it's likely that one of the reasons we didn't see any changes in the younger animals in the first study was that they were simply undertrained. We were not pushing them to increase their performance because we were standardizing it across both ages, or it was equal across both ages. Here you can see that in the second study, that after 8 weeks of training, the target number of vocalizations was over twice that we found in the original study. The other thing we looked at in this study was we looked at a 4-week time period with the neuromuscular junctions versus the 8-week time period. And so we hypothesized that our no training, our control group wouldn't have any changes either in the function of the larynx as measured by the acoustics, and that there would be no changes in the nerve or the muscle. That our short-term training group would, because it was only 4 weeks, that we would see both changes in use of the acoustics and in the neuromuscular junction morphology, its peripheral changes, and that our long-term training group would demonstrate changes, increases in all 3 parameters: functional acoustics, peripheral nerve adaptations, and in muscle hypertrophy. And indeed, our no training control group showed no changes in any of the variables. Our short training control group also showed no changes in any of the variables. So we were training them to vocalize more, but there was no change in intensity or in any of the other aspects of the acoustics, nor were there any changes in the periphery. Our long-term training group also had no changes in the acoustic measures, but we did see the exact same change in the dispersion of the motor end plate with these long-term training animals. And again, these were young animals, where the change we found in the first study was in old. So I think that we had increased the intensity enough to induce these same neuromuscular changes. However, there was no increase in muscle hypertrophy. So far we've shown that this behavioral rat model, after 8 weeks of increased vocal use, does change neuromuscular junction morphology, but there's no change in muscle fiber size. And this very well could be because of the vocalization is not of sufficient load to cause muscle hypertrophy. And so overall, our results are consistent with endurance training, that the vocalization training that we're doing is consistent with an endurance response. I'd like to just think about that for just another moment. If we think about cycling, this is a schematic showing muscle activation during cycling. And we think about endurance exercise, and Mary, this is something I'd like to talk about in the discussion with everybody. We think about endurance exercise as sustained muscle contraction. But running, cycling is not just one muscle contracting continuously. Right? There's constant activation of different sets of muscles to produce this coordinated activity. So we see throughout the pedaling that this first here, the hip extensor is activated, and then that hip extensor is released, and then at the top of the cycle is engaged again. So we have this series of muscles that are engaged and relaxed. And this is a very rough schematic because this was a last-minute thought I had brainstorm recently, so this could be better, I know. But thinking about the same kind of cycle of muscle activity with vocalization, I see everyone taking pictures. This is really rough. So but this didn't happen. No. But we engage the diaphragm for the inhalatory phase of vocalization. Then we engage the adductor muscles. And then as we are speaking, the TA and the CT are alternately contracting as we modulate our pitch, and then there's a phonation offset, and the PCA is activated. So there's the same kind of cyclical nature of activation and release of these groups of muscles throughout the different subsystems, the articulatory muscles as well. And so I think this might be a way to think about kind of the endurance nature of vocalization and vocalization training. So more to come on this model. It'll look prettier once I get it published. Once I write it. So in our lab, we are continuing to look at this rat model by increasing the behavioral and functional load and trying to better mimic human vocalizations. We're also going to be looking more now at the muscle itself, at muscle fiber types and bioenergetics. and comparing males and females. My current doctoral student, Charles Linnell, is doing some excellent work looking at the effects of estrogen on the muscles, and he's really interested in looking at the sexual dimorphism in rat vocalizations and rat muscles with an eye towards translation to the clinic. So in the past 30 minutes or so, I hope that you've learned a little bit about the theoretical framework, how the theoretical framework introduced has been applied to the limbs, how it could be applied to the voice, and how we are investigating original neuromuscular adaptations to vocal exercise using some of these basic science methods. And there is a lot more work to be done. Again, I'm very grateful that the Voice Foundation and Nancy Solomon has taken an interest in this topic area. I selfishly think it's very important, and I hope that you do too. And most importantly, thank you to all of you for your attention this morning.
Thank you. It's an honor to have Dr. Claudia Friedlander here today for a presentation, Be a Better Instrument, Sport-Specific Training for the Vocal Athlete. Please welcome Dr. Friedlander. Good morning, all. Thank you, Nancy, and I'm so grateful to the Voice Foundation for convening this panel and inviting me to speak today. It's so exciting to be here with you. I know that in speaking with you, I'm addressing an audience of people who know that it is possible to take a dysfunctional voice and make it functional, to be able to take a functional voice and make it spectacular. The voice is changeable, it can be trained, it can be taught, and I've been learning so much from listening to my colleagues this morning about the various different ways in which it is valuable and can be changed and taught. Each of us brings a unique skill set to this profession. I'm primarily a voice teacher, and as a voice teacher, I believe that in the absence of any significant medical issue, anyone can learn to sing. When a student comes to me for help, I don't make any assumptions about any built-in limitations that their voice may have. No matter what condition their voice is in, it's my intention to help them realize whatever their goals may be, and I have the expectation that with the right investment of time and energy and an open mind and often a sense of humor, that they will be able to realize their goals. That said, the best voice teacher in the world can only teach a singer to play the instrument that they bring to the studio. And I think that there's been an assumption that whatever the student walks in with, that's their instrument, that's the default, and you want to teach that instrument to sing, and it's not going to be able to be changed. I became interested in fitness after a number of years of getting frustrated because I realized that I couldn't get my students to stand up straight and take a deep breath just by asking them to. So I became very curious about how could I actually develop the tools to help them improve their alignment, help them improve their stamina, help them transform their voices, transform their instruments into something more like what they would need to do to realize their full potential. If you're an instrumentalist, you're going to seek out the finest instrument you can get your hands on. You're not going to be able to fully express your artistry if you don't have an instrument that is capable of channeling your musicianship through. A singer's instrument is their body. And so I became very interested in finding ways to help singers optimize their bodies for peak performance in singing. Sport science has a number of tools for optimizing alignment, for optimizing stamina, for optimizing the stability that singers need to be able to perform. Excellent alignment, stamina, and stability are essential for great singing. These qualities, I discovered, cannot be effectively developed in a voice studio, and a singer who does not cultivate these things is going to be limited in their ability to respond to vocal instruction. If a singer's problem is stemming from an issue with alignment, it can only be resolved in improving alignment. The same is true for stamina and so on.
we'll talk more about this later, but this is a depiction of upper cross syndrome. Friedlander in the 50s identified a number of postural syndromes that commonly develop just throughout the course of living. We all develop these postural imbalances and asymmetries just through the course of living. Upper cross syndrome is characterized by the forward head, right, sort of internally rotated shoulders, things that can happen if you spend a lot of time sitting at a computer, right, watching television, driving your car. And so certain muscles end up getting shortened, certain muscles are going to end up getting sort of stretched out. But what scientists know is that it's possible to improve the muscle length tension relationships that are going to hold you into a postural position so that the tight muscles can become lengthened and stretched, the weaker muscles can become toned and better able to balance out the muscles on the other side. Sport-specific training refers to a system whereby you analyze an athlete's biomechanics and figure out how to optimize them for peak performance in a given sport. You might get better at your sport just by playing it, but coaches and trainers know that the conditioning that you can get through strength training, if you condition the muscles and drill the movements required for your sport, will accelerate your improvement and optimize your performance. So here's Philly's pitcher, Aaron Nola. If you want to train somebody to be an excellent pitcher, you need to analyze the movements that they need to go through in order to be able to be a great pitcher. I was actually looking for some pictures of somebody training Aaron Nola, and I discovered that athletes like to have their picture taken when they're actually out in the field. But it's very hard to find pictures of them training in the gym. And similar to singing, like we want to just imagine as this mystical thing that singers achieve this amazing ability without getting into the nuts and bolts of how they get there. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the sport-specific training that I imagine somebody like Aaron Nola goes through. If you want to be able to throw a ball with great force and long distances, you're going to need to be able to do this movement, right? You're going to have to train your pectoral muscles to bring your arm in like this, and you're going to need to be able to extend the arm. So he's probably going to be doing some chest exercises. That's going to strengthen this muscle. He's going to have to do some extension exercises to train the triceps, which extend the elbow. He's going to have to work on getting some explosive force going, and he's going to have to be able to do some rotational movements. So, for example, here is data more demonstrating a cable rotation so that you can strengthen the movements while you do that. There's a clip on my computer. Actually, I'm probably just going to go take a look if I do that. So this is how sport-specific training works. You analyze the movements, you train them, you strengthen them, and then you send the athlete out into the field to work on coordination. So sport-specific training consists of two things. The quality of force production and stability are things that you cultivate in the gym using things like body weight exercises, free weights, cables, and then there is also the training that you have to do in the field to build coordination, skill, and teamwork. It seems to me that, for the most part, singers engaging in a traditional vocal education program, they spend most of their time doing the movements that are best trained in the field. Right? They're spending time in the practice room, they're spending time in the concert hall, but they aren't spending all that much time or giving much consideration to cultivating the physical alignment, stamina, and stability that you need to be able to execute the movements involved in supporting the voice. These illustrations are from my upcoming book. I asked Sandy Escobar, who did these illustrations for me, to really just focus on those muscle length tension relationships that impact vocal anatomy directly. If you look here at the typical forward head position that we often see in singers, it really impacts the arrangement of where the larynx is in the neck. So no matter how well you vocalize, no matter how well you train actual vocal range, no matter how hard you try to work on getting a student to even out their registration, if the larynx is in a position where its mobility is compromised, where its range of motion is compromised, you're only going to be able to do so much, or you're going to have to compensate for the fact that it's not going to be able to move as effectively as you would like it to. A singer who presents with this problem may find that the range of motion that they have for their larynx and for the components of resonance and articulation is going to be limited because you're only going to be able to move so far in one direction before you smack into something. Whereas if we can even out the length-tension relationships in the muscles of the torso, then without doing any local work at all, you are creating conditions where there's a better arrangement, a better relationship of the muscles, stabilizing the chest, the back, the shoulders, supporting the neck and head, and then without having done any vocalizing, the larynx is just in a better position to be able to move around the way that it needs to. Here is an illustration depicting lower crest syndrome. This is the typical sort of anterior pelvic tilt that we often see. Again, a sedentary lifestyle can create conditions where some muscles are tight, some muscles get stretched out. In lower crest syndrome, we see that there's tightness in the lower back, the abs end up getting kind of stretched out, the hip flexors are tight. And while it's not seen to have much to do with the voice, because this part of the body is not all that close to where the larynx is, the curve of the diaphragm hooked into the spine right about there. So if you've got an exaggerated curve to your lower back because of poor muscle length-tension relationships, it's going to impact range of motion for your diaphragm. It's also going to impact range of motion for your rib cage. So I can tell my student that I want them to take a deeper breath and allow their ribs to lift and expand, but if it's limited because of these exaggerated curves of the spine, there isn't a whole lot that they're going to be able to do. However, if they can engage in a sport-specific training regimen that's designed to stretch out their hip flexors, strengthen their abs, strengthen the glutes, then they will end up in a better arrangement with the muscles of the thoracic and lumbar spine and being able to breathe a whole lot better. Again, we all develop these imbalances just in the course of daily living. I think that nobody ends up with perfect muscle length-tension relationships unless you're a very dedicated athlete from the time that you're very young. So while these distortions, they may be minor, you may look at somebody walking around and they look like they're just fine, you don't note any postural imbalances, but even small postural imbalances, exaggerated curves to the neck or to the lower back can have a really big impact on the muscles and movements that we need to optimize for singing. So if I'm a fitness trainer looking at an athlete and I see that they need to improve their alignment, the first thing that I'm going to do is perform an assessment to see how closely do they resemble these various distortions. Most of us develop aspects of a number of different distortions. There's no like one recipe, but if you put them through a series of movement screens, then you can tell where the muscle's tight, where they're weak, and then devise a system for releasing and lengthening the tight muscles, strengthening and coordinating the weaker muscles. The protocol that I use for fitness training is called corrective exercise. Here's an example of how that works. Step one is you want to release the connective tissue so that the muscles are more available for movement. If I have a singer who is rather weak throughout the shoulders, which is what we typically see if somebody's got a lower head, then what you want to do is first release the underactive or tight muscles. Kirsten here is demonstrating submyofascial release with a foam roller. The way that this works is that you position your body weight on top of the foam roller, which is rather firm, and you're effectively giving yourself a deep tissue massage. You just want to sort of roll back and forth, and it's going to get the connective tissue to loosen up, heat up, so that that part of the body is more available to movement. It's important to loosen up the connective tissue because it has very poor vascularity. The connective tissues, like the bags that kind of hold the muscles and connect them together and then connect them into the tendons and ligaments that connect them to bones. And they're designed to be very stable and very firm. So if you build that up first, then the muscle fibers that they are containing are going to be more available to being stretched and strengthened. If you don't, then you might exercise the body part, really stretch it a lot, but then once you're done with your exercise, the connective tissue is going to try to pull it back into the shape that it was in before. So it's important to warm it up first. So step one is you release those muscles. After you've released it, you can then stretch it. And here she is doing a dynamic stretch. This is a half-angel dynamic stretch for the shoulders. It's just going to warm up the entire area between the scapula, and it's also going to give her a good stretch through the chest, which may be tight in, go back. See, the chest muscles here are a little bit tight, and these are the muscles that are weak, so we want to get her to stretch and lengthen the chest muscles as well. The next step is to do a targeted exercise to strengthen inactive muscles. I don't have a picture of that, so I'm going to demonstrate it for you here. We're talking about the rhomboids and the middle and lower trapezius. These are the muscles that are going to retract the scapula and enable you to maintain a good elevated position of the sternum. Let's all try that actually. If I could just get you to sort of slump forward in your chairs a little bit. Okay. And then slowly, if you want to, see if you can engage the muscles between your shoulder blades to then draw yourself back up. You're engaging your rhomboids and your middle and lower trapezius. When we see our students have their chests collapse in the studio while they're singing, and you tell them, keep your sternum up, and then they try to find some muscle in the chest that's going to do that, and they're not going to be able to because the muscles that maintain that elevated position are actually in the back. So after I have done myself myofascial release and a stretch for those muscles in the back, I'm then going to want to do an isolated strength training movement for those muscles. And it is a rear delt fly. You actually can do this in the studio. You do this without smacking at your neighbor. You can try this too, but you can see how engaging the muscles between your shoulders and the back will elevate your sternum in the front. So then, having done that isolated exercise, you want to integrate that into a more full body movement. And so here we've got her doing a lat pull down. She's going to keep her shoulder blades retracted, right? You don't want your shoulders to come up like this when you're doing the exercise. She's got her shoulders sitting nice and low, even though she's going to be pulling on bands. And then that integrates the scapular retraction, integrates the new strength that she's got in her rhomboids and the lower trapezius into a more whole body movement. When I first started studying vocal pedagogy, I read all the books and I looked at all the illustrations of what good alignment was supposed to look like. And there are great illustrations that show you, yes, you're supposed to have your ears and your shoulders and your hips and your ankles all lined up in a straight line. And I thought I was just supposed to hold myself in that position to be able to sing well, and it doesn't work that way. There's too much else going on when you're performing if you have to be thinking about your body position. Alignment is extremely important for athletes of all kinds. So if you look at the skeleton as though it's just this very sophisticated suspension bridge, if you improve muscle length tension relationships between all the various parts, that's going to bring you into better alignment by default, so that you're just like that when you're walking around all the time, so that you can breathe the full range of motion through the rib cage, so that you don't have to think about keeping your shoulders back and your sternum up. If the muscles are in good length tension relationships, so that you don't have tight chest muscles pulling yourself in that way, and weak muscles unable to counter that in the back, then no amount of trying to position yourself is going to help. But But if you just go and do a few simple stretches and strength training exercises in the gym, then by default you're going to be walking around with much better dynamic upper body alignment. And you will be able to go to the voice studio, and your voice teacher is going to know that you're going to be able to respond to the things that they're asking you to do when they talk about things like breath management. Something else that's very important for singers is stamina. We heard this morning a lot about what the physiological basis of stamina is. Dr. Sandage talked about oxygen consumption. Oxygen consumption is one benchmark of cardiorespiratory fitness. Oxygen consumption has to do with how much of the oxygen that you actually are able to metabolize when you breathe. We don't use all of the oxygen that we breathe in. The machine that she was showing you measures the oxygen that's coming out when the athlete exhales. And so you can figure out by default how much they were actually able to retain and use. If you consume oxygen well, then you don't have to breathe as frequently because you're making more efficient use of that resource. Another benchmark of cardiorespiratory fitness is stroke volume, how much blood your heart pumps every time it beats. You can see that if you were able to consume oxygen well, and if you were able to pump a lot of blood every time your heart beats, you're not going to have to breathe as frequently because the blood is circulating more efficiently and because you're consuming the oxygen more efficiently. If you have a singer who, no matter how well trained they are in breath management, they still can't make it through the ends of long phrases that they need to sing, the problem probably does not rest with your technique. The problem is probably one of an issue of cardiorespiratory fitness, oxygen consumption. And that again is something that you cannot really train in the studio. Stage directors are getting more and more active with what we're demanding of our singers, and so once you're on stage running around, you're going to place an even greater demand on your oxygen. Fortunately, this is another thing that can be improved upon fairly easily in the gym. There are techniques like interval training that cause adaptations that improve the quality of the stroke volume, increase stroke volume, and improve our ability to consume oxygen. Interval training is just a system whereby you tax the heart, get your heart rate up so that you're having to breathe more frequently, you're going to have to work harder, and then letting it cool down, maybe for a minute, maybe for 2 minutes, and then just do nice and easy exercise until your heart rate cools down, and using the calculations that Dr. Sandage was talking about, figuring out what is your maximum heart rate, and then just doing a calculation, what would 60% of that be, what would 90% of that be, and if you can get yourself to go back and forth between what those two numbers are while you do some cardio exercise, then your body's going to get the memo, or you want me to be able to consume more oxygen, you want me to be able to pump more blood, and just doing a couple of 20-minute sessions in the course of the week, you'll see substantial improvements in your cardiorespiratory fitness. Whereas if you don't do this and you just keep doing your vocal exercises, you might just hit a wall where you're only going to be able to sustain a phrase so long. So again, if the issue rests with stamina, physical stamina, no amount of technique is going to be able to resolve that, but through a rather simple adaptation of your exercise regimen, you can really improve your lengths of phrases and just have more breath to be able to shape phrases how you want, do dynamics, all these cool things. The other area where singers can really benefit from doing some of their sport-specific training in the gym is in the area of stabilization. Stabilization refers to just being able to provide a stable base of support with one part of your body for the other parts of your body that need to be free to move around. A big example of this for singers is being able to stabilize breath management. If you notice, the four major muscles of the abdomen, the rectus abdominis, transversus abdominis, internal and external obliques, they all have really significant points of attachment to the rib cage. They come all the way up. So if you are able to stabilize your core and your movement while also executing your best practice for breath management, then you're going to be able to take your technique onto the stage. Conversely, if you have a student who sings fabulously in the studio and they're just standing there, but then as soon as you introduce any kind of stage movement, their technique falls apart, chances are they don't have the balanced musculature in the core and abdomen adequate to stabilize their movement through the torso while still working the best of their breath management. So it's very important to have a strong core. One of the questions I'm asked most frequently as a fitness trainer is, can I work out my abs and still sing? Can I have a six-pack, or is that going to mess up my technique? And the answer is that nobody's technique was ever improved by having flabby abs. At least that's not what I teach. Having a strong core is fantastic for stabilizing everything that you want to do with your breath management. The key is to balance out these muscles so that you don't have just one group of muscles that's super tight and then everything else is going to be not compensating, not able to balance it out and compensate. Similar to if I've got like tight pecs and weak shoulders, I'm going to be like this. If I've got a super tight rectus abdominis, if I've got a fabulous, well-defined six-pack, but I don't have a strong lumbopelvic hip complex, I don't have strong obliques, then I am going to feel like I'm tight through the abdomen, I'm not going to be able to take a deep breath, and then my teacher's going to tell me to stop going to the gym. But if you work these muscles in balance, they are going to do so much for you in terms of being able to optimize your central blood pressure. Here's an illustration of the muscles we were talking about earlier, the rhomboids and the middle and lower trapezius. These are muscles that retract and stabilize the shoulders. Also very important for stabilizing breath management. Different people take different approaches to breath management for singing, and many voice teachers find a dynamic high position of the sternum to be important things so that the chest isn't collapsing, the ribs aren't collapsing as you exhale. So being able to stabilize the scapula in the back and also keep the shoulders from elevating, right? Like the upper trapezius is going to want to do, is very important for your singing. Also, if you want to translate your technique to the stage and you're gesticulating with your arms, again, to be able to stabilize the position of the sternum without having your technique go out the window, because you've got that stability. Being able to stabilize also the lumbopelvic hip complex is important for stage movement, because if you start walking around and the way that you are moving your legs and your hips is going to have an impact on the way that your torso and your lower back are oriented. If that's not a comfortable thing with the way that you are used to practicing your breath management, then that is also going to cause problems for you. So these are all ways in which doing the part of sport-specific training that takes place in the gym rather than in the field can be of immense benefit for singers. I would love to see most vocal performance degree programs incorporate some manner of exercise programs so that singers can really optimize their instruments for peak performance, and so that the studio teacher knows that when the singer walks into their studio, they're bringing with them the best instrument that they possibly can. So I'm not going to have to teach them how to compensate for weaknesses that I can't address in the studio. I know that that's being handled. If they've got some sort of postural issue, they've got the resources to be able to fix that. The best case scenario for a singer who doesn't manage to resolve these distortions is that they're going to have suboptimal alignment or stamina or stability, and they may be able to compensate for it. But that compensation is going to be effortful. If I have to be like holding myself in a certain way to be able to pump my breath at my voice while I'm performing, then that's a quality of force production that I have to be exerting in performance that I'd rather not be, because I just want to be the character and I just want to make music and express myself. But these things can be compensated for by some singers. The worst case scenario is that a lot of singers are just going to hit a wall. If you've got a postural distortion that is limiting range of motion for your larynx or for your articulators or for your resonance, you may find that no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to release that high note with the kind of bloom that you want, because you just can't allow your larynx to shift into a position where it can vibrate freely. And this is why I'm so passionate about this, because I believe that anyone can learn to sing. Anyone who's willing to put in the time can learn to sing spectacularly if they have an instrument that has been optimized for peak performance in singing. There are not necessarily any built-in limitations to what the voice can do. However, you're going to be limited by your physiology unnecessarily if there are postural distortions or lack of stamina or lack of stabilization that are keeping you from being able to move in the way and with the kind of vigor that you need to be able to express your artistry. So, in closing, I think that one of the reasons that we're all here today, there's been an increased interest in exercise, especially in opera singers, because we all want to look good in HD now. There's more pressure to look like the character, and we have things like the Bioenergetics blog glorifying the beautiful singers, and I love that because it's starting to change the stereotype of the fat lady singing. However, I feel that it's really important for us as a community and for singers and for opera companies and other producing organizations to understand that the body is the instrument. If you try to work on the aesthetics of your instrument without taking into consideration that everything you do to change the way your body looks is going to change the way that it functions as an instrument, then you're missing the point. But if you work out in a way that is designed to optimize your body for peak performance in your sport, in this case singing, then form will follow function. These are photographs of elite athletes that were taken by photographer Howard Schatz in his book Athlete. I recommend it very highly, celebrating the different results that different athletes get because of their sport-specific training. And you'll notice that they're all different heights, sizes, different levels of body composition. We can't know what the optimal level of body fat would be for a singer. It's probably going to be different for one singer or another. We know some things about how abdominal weight can confer an advantage for breath management, but too much might encumber you. So if you will just pursue a fitness regimen that is designed to optimize your body for peak performance, then we're going to find out what you look like, and you're probably going to look extremely confident. It's more about the ability to express yourself in an expansive way, to be able to breathe fully, to be able to move in whatever way you want, and to make sure that you have the stamina to get through a performance than it is to look good in HD, although if you pursue a regimen that's designed to optimize your body for peak performance, you're probably going to look great in HD. So that's what I've got to say.
Thank you, Claudia, for the excellent practical tips and exercises. We're all going to go try them as soon as the session's over, I'm sure. Our next speaker is Mark Moliterno. He's a professional opera singer, voice teacher, yoga teacher, IAYT certified yoga therapist, workshop leader, and author. Mr. Moliterno has bachelor's and master's degrees in voice and opera from the Oberlin Conservatory of Music, where he worked with the well-known vocal pedagogue Richard Miller. He continued his formal musical studies at Rutgers University, the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and I'm going to butcher some of the names, the Britten Pears School for Advanced Musical Study in Oldenburg, England, and the Hochschule für Musik Mozarteum in Salzburg, Austria. Mr. Moliterno has performed in leading operatic roles and is a concert soloist and recitalist all over the world. He's a member of the voice faculty at Westminster Choir College in Princeton, New Jersey, and maintains private voice and yoga therapy studios. Mark founded Yoga Voice, a program that combines several traditions of yoga, philosophy, and practice with systematic voice technique. He regularly presents workshops, authors articles in Yoga Living magazine, has published in the Journal of Singing, and is co-author of the book, The Musician's Breath, The Role of Breathing in Human Expression. So I'm happy to welcome Mark Moliterno to the podium for our final musical talk.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. So I always like to begin these talks by asking how many people have a regular yoga practice. What's regular practice? How many people have never tried yoga before? Okay, not so many. And how many people are stiff when they wake up in the morning? And how many people can touch their toes right now? Okay, good. All right, so we're set for yoga. All right. Everybody please stand up. So this is a really difficult part of the morning, standing up. And one caveat here, if you touch your neighbor when you do yoga, it's good luck. So I want everyone simply to stand in an habitual standing posture. So without even thinking too much about it, just notice where your feet are on the floor, notice where your knees are in relationship to your ankles, notice where the hip structure is, notice where your pelvic bone is. Is it rotating forward and down, or is it sort of tilting up and back a little bit? Do you feel sort of balanced? Are you weighting to one side of the body or the other? You know, what's happening in the rib cage, the chest, and then the relationship of the head and neck to the sternum. And just take a moment here and breathe. So we don't often consciously breathe. It's just taking a moment to breathe. Good, and then if you would take your feet and now notice where they are, and just bring them now to a sort of parallel, come to hip width apart with the feet, and that's anatomical hip width. And what I often say at these lectures is when I ask the people to bring their feet to hip width, the women do this. So please find your hip joints. You're about 6 or 7 inches from the on the sides from the center of your pelvis, and then bring your feet below that. Right? And now notice where the weight is bearing your feet. Try to have a perfect parallel lines with your insteps. And then notice how that feels. It might feel different for a lot of people. Notice what's happening again in the pelvic structure. Notice what's happening in the rib cage, the sternum, and the shoulders and neck. And now take in a breath. And notice if that changes anything. How you're standing. And being aware of your breath. And the sensations of breath. So breath is coming in and going out through the nose. What are the sensations of breath? How does the breath open the body? Where does the breath contract the body as you exhale? Notice the sensations of breath. And then from here, intentionally, with an inhalation, raise your right arm. So everyone shake their right hand. Good, okay, that's your right hand. Now inhaling, raise your right arm. Just, and exhale and lower the right arm. And inhaling, bring up the left arm. And exhale, lower the left arm. Now, I'd like you to do it one more time, and this time begin your inhalation before you move, complete the movement, then complete the inhalation. So you're timing the movement surrounded by the breath, and we'll do it the same thing on the exhalation. So begin an inhalation, and then bring the arm up. Complete the movement, then the breath. Now begin the exhalation, and lower. Time it out. Nice, same thing on the left side. Begin the inhalation, arm up. And begin the exhalation and lower. And then ask yourself, did movement change with the intentionality of your breathing? Right? Okay. All right, you may all have a seat. Thank you. So you've all just done yoga. That's yoga. And I will try to now explain why you did yoga and how you did yoga. My job today is to try and to bring together two traditions of science that actually, when they become embodied, become art. So when technology becomes embodied, it becomes an art form. And my objective is to try and do that today, and I often like to think of what the word yoga means. What does the word yoga mean, and how does this inform what we're talking about? So the word yoga comes from a Sanskrit word, yug, Y-U-J, which means to yoke things together. And the image in the ancient texts is of a farmer plowing his field with oxen pulling the plow. And if the oxen are not yoked together, then of their own accord, this one could go this way, that one could go that way, and they would destroy and pull apart the cart and destroy the field and cause great suffering for the farmer. So what the farmer does is he yokes the two beasts together to drive at his command in the direction he wants them to go. So this is what yoga means, excuse me. This is what yoga means, to draw things together that might seem like opposing, or might on their own be left to fragment and separate. And so our first question is, what is yoga? It's the yoking of complementary opposites into a unified whole, and this is where the idea of union comes in. Drawing together two things that seem like opposites that actually can become one. And we think of the yin-yang symbol, that symbol of wholeness that looks like two separate things. Steadiness and comfort, the idea of two things coexisting in the body at the same time in yoga postures and in singing. And stillness and movement. So there's a sense of stillness and movement in yoga postures. So as I said, my objective today is to bring together two disciplines and two sciences that are arts that into one thing, and to look at how they can kind of be brought together into a unitive whole. And in that way, every singer becomes a yoga. Every singer is the embodiment of both those aspects of physicality and awareness, and also of vocal technique. And so it's all brought together into one GPS location in that body, right? And that's actually our intention. So yoga can also mean the reintegration of that which appears to have become separated. And the word appears here is important because the question is, has it really? Or is only our consciousness of those things separated? And then I think of yoga as a body-mind technology. And I use one word here, body-mind, because more and more we're understanding that mind and body are one thing. We think with our bodies. No one can really say where the mind ends and where the body begins. So body-mind is really one concept in yoga. So is yoga exercise? This is a really good question. We think of yoga as exercise because we think of the postures and the beautiful models on the covers of magazines who can do amazing things. But yoga is more than just exercise. And this is a great quote by Leslie Kavanaugh, a great teacher in New York. He says, in yoga, the mind, breath, and body are being asked to do the same thing at the same time in a conscious, integrated way. So really what we're talking about with yoga is a technology which can be physically based, but also is a mind-based activity. And really, in the Yoga Sutras, which are the primary source document of yoga, which are, we think about 2nd century, the plan of yoga is to become a meditator and to become still in your mind, as we will start to look at. So what yoga does, yoga brings us into our bodies, connecting our breath, our body, and our cognitive awareness. There are physiological benefits to yoga. It decreases the autonomic nervous system arousal. It increases psychophysiological relaxation, so heart rate variability increases and respiratory rate reduces with regular yoga practice, and improves somatic steadiness in tests that sort of regulate and monitor those things. So we look to the Yoga Sutra as a guide. The Yoga Sutra is 196 aphorisms about what yoga is. It gives no instruction about how to do postures. It simply talks about this plan, this technology of yoga. So it's an early technological treatise. And it lays out this idea of an eightfold path of classical yoga, in which there are two, the first two aspects are called yama, which are restraints, and niyama, observances. These are ethical practices, things to restrain from your life and things to build into your life. And the idea here is that what's in the mind And what's in the heart, when we do physical practice, actually gets stored in the body as pattern. So it's really important when you do yoga postures to start with clear intention and clear motivation, and to have built into your life already some of these restraints that are things like, non-harming, non-stealing, non-coveting, that kind of stuff. And then to have these other observances like contentment, purity, peacefulness, those things are actually in the mind and at work when you start working the body. Then we get into the physical postures of yoga. So we start with the mental side, and then we come into the physical side. And that's the part we think of today as yoga. We think about the asana practices. Then pranayama, breath control, breath mastery. And this is an interesting word. Pranayama is often thought to mean breath control, but the word is actually broken into two words, prana and iyama, which is to free. So yama is like a restraint or a control, so prana is life force or breath. So instead of pranayama being breath restraint, it's actually pranayama, which is freeing of the breath. And so breath control in the sense of we're learning how to free the internal breath and the inner line of breath. Pratyahara, sensory mastery, and then those first five steps in the Eightfold Path are called Hatha Yoga, H-A-T-H-A. And the last three are called Raja Yoga. These are the meditative practices: concentration, absorption, and finally integration. So integration would be what we call today flow. You're in a state where things are happening and you have lost the sense of your own small sort of ego self. In the process, you are now in the flow. All right, so I'd like to just give a little elucidation here. We're all going to learn Sanskrit this morning. So yoga, this is the very first statements in the Yoga Sutra. Now the teaching of yoga. So what Patanjali says here, and we think Patanjali was a person, but it might have just been a name given to a set of teachings that were all handed down orally back in the day. So he says, now the teaching of yoga. And now the first word is a word that scholars have unpacked for their careers, actually. And that word now, what does now mean? Well, now means that yoga doesn't begin sometime in the future when you become more flexible. Yoga doesn't become when you've lost 10 pounds. Yoga doesn't start when your relationships are better. Or when, you feel understood. Yoga begins now. So yoga is like, I think of yoga as sort of like a beautiful diamond, that if we had a single light shining on the diamond and we all stood around the diamond and we all looked at it from different angles, we would all see different light reflected from that diamond. We would all see different facets and different colors. So yoga is present moment in the now, and you get from yoga based on where your perspective is and where you're standing in this moment. So yoga begins now, and yoga begins to work with exactly where we are and who we are at this moment. So the second one, here's where I wanted to teach some Sanskrit. Yoga, let's all say it together. Yoga, Chitta, Vritti, Nirodha. Yeah, Yoga, Chitta, Vritti, Nirodha. Let's try it. Perfect. And this means that yoga, and I've broken down the words here, yoga is a practice of calming the mind-body waves. It's about calming and stilling the waves of consciousness that are present in our mind-body. And those can be things even like sleep and awake, or happy, sad, or any just fluctuations that we have in our consciousness. And I often think of, if a picture that is given is that if we're looking into a beautiful body of water, and if there are waves in that water, and we look into the water to see a reflection, our vision of ourselves is distorted. We see the distortion of the waves, and we begin to believe things about ourselves based on what we see as a distorted picture. But as soon as that surface becomes glass-like and clear, then we look into the water and we see the perfect image of ourselves. We see the truth. Right? So these waves that appear in the mind-body consciousness are different than what Patanjali says in verse 3 and 4. Then, when the mind-body waves are calm or still, then awareness can abide in its very nature. So awareness is that part of you that is actually able to look at the mind-body waves. That consciousness of that awareness or witness part of your consciousness. So until then, awareness takes itself to be the mind-body waves. So back to our image of looking into the water. If I look into the water and I see the distortion of my image and I think I am that distortion, then I might, go get plastic surgery because my nose is too big or my mouth is, wrong size or whatever. But when the water's calm, then I can actually look in and see exactly who I am. And so awareness is actually what yoga refers to as the true self. You begin to see the truth about yourself. And in my view, that's where singers are always trying to sing from. Singers are trying to come from that sense of deep self. And I often ask, how many people sing because they don't like to sing? Right? Singers sing because they have something inside of them that is trying to express itself. And that self is that awareness self, I believe. All right, so chitta-vritti, then, these fluctuations of our consciousness become ruts. They become patterned behaviors. And we call these samskaras. And samskaras are habitual body-mind ruts or patterns that create knots or blocks to the free flow of the voice and its expression. And these samskaras, or these patterning in our body, can reveal itself as in physical tension, breath manipulation, difficulty listening, any of these items up here. So the benefits of yoga practice are that it illuminates and then works with samskaras. So as soon as you start to work into the yoga practices, you really come face to face with some of these patterns of learned behavior and response. And then yoga instantly starts to work on it, which is a really interesting concept. Embedded in the yoga technology is the idea that practice reveals the answers, which is like singing, right? You don't actually learn to sing from a book, and you don't actually learn to sing from your teacher. And I'm a voice teacher. You learn to sing by going to the practice room and figuring it out, right? And same thing in yoga practice. You learn by doing. You have to learn by doing. So yoga practice down-regulating stress. As a yoga therapist, this is what we really do. We work with stress conditions that can cause physical illness. And even we work with doctors and people who are under medical care to help regulate stress around their conditions. Right? So it's very, very good for down-regulating stress. Yoga practice regulates the nervous system, and one area of great interest to me that I'm starting to just really explore is the whole concept of the vagus nerve and the vagal tonus, and especially the work of Dr. Stephen Porges around the polyvagal theory. So yoga absolutely has a relationship to vagal tonus, and which means that people are then ready, in a state of readiness, to respond either in a more calm way to sympathetic nervous uptake, or then get wrapped up in that kind of acceleration. Regular yoga practice develops body-mind control and freedom. This is where we get the concept of steadiness and strength plus flexibility. Develops physical, mental, and emotional resilience. Hydrates fascia. This is, Dr. Friedlander touched on this a little bit, the whole discovery of fascia as the soft tissue that actually moves everything in your body is really, really important. And in yin yoga, where we hold postures for long, extended periods of time, it actually nourishes and hydrates the fascia, which then makes substantive changes in the structure of the body. And yoga then cultivates self-awareness. That's that awareness piece that is important. Okay, so now we move to singing, and we look at the historical bel canto pedagogy, which most of us are pretty, at least have a lot of information about already. But one of the guiding principles was interesting to me of historical bel canto pedagogy is the unification of complementary opposites. That's exactly what bel canto uses as a guiding principle. So we think about the chiaroscuro. We think about appoggio, which is the balancing of opposing forces in your breath mechanism. We think about coloratura and legato. And in my training, of course, with Richard Miller, he always mentioned that there's always a sense of legato and coloratura, and there's always a sense of the spin and movement of the voice in legato singing. So these are unified ideas. And then, of course, you have unification of registers. So these are all hallmarks of bel canto methodology. So if we look at systematic voice technique, and of course, As Nancy mentioned, my mentor was Richard Miller, and I had that great privilege for 5 years at Oberlin to have this hands-on relationship with him, and he remained a friend until he passed away. But if we look at the structure of singing, for instance, and we look at those are just chapter topical headlines from the book, we sort of get an idea, again, a refresher of what systematic voice technique is about. It's how to look at bel canto methodology and break it down into component parts. If we take the elements of systematic voice technique, distill it from Miller, we can look at that these are sort of how to group some of these different components together. We can look at, from the bottom up, a coordinated onset and release, which was always the very first thing he did. It was foundational. It was the root of everything he did in every singing lesson. So that we would say that equates with sort of rhythm. We can look at registration and range stabilization, which is really inflection of the voice. We can look at agility and vibrancy, which is the way we energize. We can look at sostenothermodynamics and our expressiveness, resonance and articulation, which is communication, prephonatory preparation, which is artistic intention, and inspiration and integration, which is your freedom and your sense of creative wholeness. So these technical vocal elements are related to the body's energies, and this is where we bring the two together of yoga and singing into the chakra system. So the chakra system is actually a model based in very ancient texts about where the energies of the body relate and how they relate to the individual. And we can see in this picture, you know, the I am, I feel, I do, I love, I speak, I see, I understand. So basically, from the very most fundamental, essential nature of being, all the way to a higher sense of cognitive awareness, I understand things. And we can say that the chakras also correspond to evolutionary development of a species, but we can also say that they also correspond to the development of the human spine in each individual. So we come into the world, we are present, and then our spine develops and the chakras develop as our spine develops over time. So there's a lot of research being done now to substantiate these ancient practices and treatments that yoga is proposing, that has always proposed. So now our research is catching up with the ancient traditions. And some of these, there's been research into the chakras, and are they real? And that's always the question. Are they real? Can you open me up and see one? And the answer is, of course, we don't know. But there is a physiological basis for the chakras in this gap junction theory, and it's way too involved to go into here. But those are the citations, and as an expression of subtle body and the autonomic nervous system. And so these are really interesting publications that explain in great detail some of the physiological basis for a truth about the chakras. But if we look here at the chakra, here's kind of an interesting model. We notice that there are different nerve plexuses involved. We notice that they correspond to different parts of the glandular system. We notice that there are different systems involved in each of these points. And we say that there are 7. So it starts in the root and moves upward toward the crown of the head. So chakras are then energetic wheels. And the word chakra literally means wheel of the subtle body corresponding to placement on the spine, nerve plexuses, organs, biological systems, and we would also say the glandular system. So there's evidence that the nerve plexuses and these energy centers, and when we perceive them in our bodies in terms of thought, they actually stimulate release in the glandular system. So it's interesting that way. And then, of course, what happens in the glands changes the way you think. Right? It has an effect on your mind. So body-mind connectors. We can think of the chakras as a conceptual model that organizes our experience of sensation. And this is where it's important for singers. We can look at how we sense the voice and sense the body by these 7 different energy centers or areas of cognitive sensation awareness in the body. And there are hubs of breath energy and prana, or life force, and this gets more into the yoga teaching. Chakras are influenced by our patterns, so physical alignment in our bodies, our movement and our exercise affect the chakras. So when we do yoga postures, we're working in energy. We're working in the chakras, we're working the subtle body. And And of course, that affects the glandular system and all those different systems of the body. So it's more than just an external framework kind of exercise. It's a deep exercise that works into the deeper, more subtle body. We're looking at physical alignment, rest, physical position, and tonus. And of course, that would affect chakra relationships. The mental activity of the mind, doing or effort, and the stress. So here's where we start to see that there's a psychological side to each of these parts of the body, as well as a physical side. So this is where yoga becomes the yoke of mind and body. And then we would also say that our beliefs, what we believe, and our fundamental core principles actually affect the chakras as well. So our background and our contextual understanding and our worldview affect the chakras. So chakras harmonize with natural elements. We would say that there's a quality of earth, water, air, fire, and space in each of these chakras. Chakras correspond to and harmonize with a dharma, an essential nature in which each one has its purpose. And then we would say that they also, because that they are energetic centers, they are often associated with light frequencies or color, and there's a whole practice of yoga around sound, and around sounds and mantras and different sounds that actually activate, and some sounds are called bija mantras that actually activate the chakras, and other sounds are vowel sounds that actually cool them down and down-regulate overstimulated chakras. So we can think of sound as harmonizing. And then I think there's a relationship to the elements of systematic vocal technique. So this is an interesting quote I found in Lamperti. He says, the greatest incentive to coordinate control is the insistent desire to do what you know perfectly well how to do with your text, time, and tune. So he presumes that you already know what to do. Behind your thought of word, rhythm, and tone, back of your effort to consolidate your energies, lie your elemental powers. There's the concept of the elements. Why not make use of them, organize them, and let them lead instead of lag? All right, so even Lamperti, I think, had a view to these energetic centers of the body and their correspondence to essential elemental qualities in nature. Good. Nancy, I forgot to set my timer. How am I doing?
Well, according to the green light up there, you have time, but actually, according to my watch, you're 4 minutes over.
Okay.
No, you're good.
I'm good, okay. I have this really fancy watch with a timer and I forgot to start it.
I was so into it.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. All right, so now if we look at how to connect the elements of singing voice technique into the body, we can look at this. We can say, here's that list again, just to remind us. And now we connect it to the chakras. So the first chakra is the element of earth. We can say that onset, release, and foundation and rhythm is a first chakra event. We would say that the water chakra, second chakra, is responsible for flow and integration of breath and energy. So we would say that registration, creative flow, and inflection come from second chakra. And this is an interesting point. Registration for the voice is an energetic event that has to start in the hips, actually in and around the sacrum. And when that energetic alignment is there, then actually what happens up here happens quite naturally. Fire is the third chakra, and then we would say that that's the solar plexus region. We would say that corresponds to agility, vibrancy, personality, and energization of the voice. So the brilliance and the color and warmth of the voice is actually an epigastria. It comes from the epigastria energetically. We would say that fourth chakra is the air chakra. It's the heart center. The dynamics, sostenuto, and emotional or expression comes from fourth chakra. Fifth chakra, we would say space and ether is the element. This is where resonance, articulation, and listening happens. That's the base of the thyroid notch to the crown of your palate. It includes the ears. So listening is just as important part of communication and especially in singing as phonation. I mean, listening actually opens the chakra. And when we don't listen well, actually, it tends to close energetically that area of the body. Sixth chakra is about thought and sort of all the elements combined. This is the command center of the body, obviously the brain. So this is where Miller would talk about Prefonatory preparation, or prefonatory gesture, or prefonatory setting. So it happens quickly at the level of your sixth chakra. Sixth chakra also is where we can get a little bogged down with too much information. So when our singing students are trying to process diction, tone, breathing, all the different things that they're trying to do all at once, sixth chakra can get a little blocked. And invariably that sort of eliminates creativity. So sixth chakra, really important to keep clear. And then seventh chakra is about sort of inspiration and imagination and integration. So what we're doing here is we're uniting these traditions, again, creating a yoga within each singer. A classical yoga, and these are the traditions, these are based on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Tantric yoga, which is where the chakra theory comes from. Nada yoga, which is sound and mantra. And karma yoga, which is action and work. So how all of those that we've talked about already, but this karma yoga piece is interesting because that's actually trying to find unification and wholeness through your work and through your approach to your work and your purpose for work and why you sing. So that's an interesting piece too that sort of awakens the mind-body awareness. And then systematic voice technique, we know what that is. And then so the results of bringing these two things together is that we understand the singing voice is a manifestation of body, mind, spirit matrix, and that there's a self-awareness piece. And when we become self-aware, the self-healing and wellness mechanisms that are actually inherent in the system actually begin to awaken and actually begin to articulate. And then we can talk about then what happens is we come to a point of authenticity artistically. That is to say, we are truly ourselves in our singing. So a synthesis of yoga and singing voice technique become artistic freedom. So this is an interesting question I pose to my students and to people in workshops. How can a synthesis of these two art sciences lead us to a personal awareness and vocal artistic freedom that comes from authenticity? And that is the great question. And again, that's something we each have to answer for ourselves. Right? There's no way to really know that because we're each different. So when we do singing voice technique in yoga postures, and this is what I often do, I put people in postures as they're singing to awaken and awaken the energies and awaken the awareness in the body. It connects our breath, our mind, and our voice to our body. It regulates breathing, especially the exhalation phase, which is down-regulating to the nervous system. Exhalation is associated with parasympathetic response. So when parasympathetic response becomes dominant, we become calmer. So singing should be a calming activity to your nervous system, but not for a lot of people. Right? Cultivates awareness of subtle movements, and you can read the rest of these. Brings tension to muscle surfaces. It leaves imprints and residues, so we begin to feel the imprint of these postures in our bodies as we come out of them, and then we start to educate our bodies as to what the balances of mind-body awareness are. And then this deepens technical awareness and function. So here's just a couple more ideas about pedagogical applications. Okay, and that's the basis of my work.